This game should be on absolutely everybody's radar. For me, definitely the game of the week. You got number 7 Tennessee going to Sanford Stadium to play number 12 Georgia. And I've talked about Georgia a bunch on this show, and they've had so many ups and downs this season. I mean, you can even go all the way back to Texas, and it almost kind of feels similarly in that way, right? I mean, which version? It's almost the same story again. Which version of Georgia are we going to get? Are we going to get the Georgia that we saw against Florida, or are we going to get the Georgia that we saw against Texas? And you know, when you think about this too, I mean, certainly there was a lot of pressure on Tennessee, right? I mean, they're coming in, they're ranked number 7, they have one loss. The the defense has pretty much been the backbone of this team, which is typically not what we've seen under Josh Harple teams. Typically, it's usually a lot of explosive offense, a lot of big plays, and typically they're running the ball and then setting up the deep ball that way. Now, to me, obviously the bigger storylines is obviously the quarterback battle, if you will. I mean, Nico has been facing some injuries here and there, and right now I think it's still tentative in terms of whether he's playing or not. But if I'm incorrect about that, definitely comment and correct me. But right now he's at 65% completion percentage, 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and for a redshirt freshman, I mean he's a lot of fun to watch. He's athletic. He can sling the ball. He's good at making reads and precision and whatnot. But I think what's going to be different about this week compared to previous weeks is, I say this over and over again on this show, but you have to be able to run the ball. You have to be able to run the ball. I mean, there's really no way around that, especially when it comes to playing in playoffs and national championships and whatnot. I'm what I'm interested the most in terms of this story is who's going to be better at running the ball. It's going to be about who's going to be better at running the ball and who's going to make less mistakes. And the reason I'm so toned into the rushing attack right now is you have Dylan Sampson, who I would argue is one of the most underrated running backs in all of college football. And what excites me most about seeing him is, just his balance, being able to break tackles, his athleticism, his explosiveness as he's making those decisions and figure out which holes to cut through. And for the most part, the offensive line has been pretty solid this year for him. I mean, you definitely seen a number of times where they're averaging 235 yards rushing a game. They're getting big plays. They're opening up holes for him, and it's good in that way for him because it's definitely making him more versatile compared to some of the other teams that we've seen in years past. And obviously Josh Harple is an excellent coach too. I mean, you can tell that he's getting this program definitely in the right direction too, and I would definitely argue a lot of Tennessee fans, definitely should be excited, all things considered, right? I mean, you play when you play in the SEC. I mean, you're always going to have those 7-9 teams that you can definitely argue could be ranked going into the year. But that's the reason why I think it's so important that Tennessee really has to be able to run the ball because you can even flip this, right? I mean, I think a lot of people would counter and say, well, Georgia's secondary has certainly been shaky in certain instances, right? And you've definitely seen them give up some big plays here and there. And obviously Tennessee's offense is a lot different than Texas because with Texas, for example, the reason why I don't think they were successful is because their bread and butter is being able to get those quick screen plays, getting those yards after catch, and relying on defenses not be able to tackle efficiently. When you're playing against a team like Georgia, that linebacking core, those edge rushers, they're not the type of guys that are going to give up yards after catch every time. So in that regard, it's definitely a little bit of a different element to this game. And if I'm flipping this from Georgia's perspective as well, I mean, we all know about Carson Beck. I'm not going to get into the weeds with him, but we know about the interception issues, and for the most part against Ole Miss, we didn't really see him have like any serious blunders other than if you want to count the garbage time interception against Ole Miss. I mean, that's one thing, but I would definitely argue for the most part, I don't think you necessarily need Carson Beck to really take over this game. I mean, I think too, I would argue that, I think Georgia is missing being at home, right? I mean, they have 3 home games to finish the season. they haven't been home in a while, and I really think the Samford crowd is really going to be a factor in this game because I think the Bulldog Nation's going to be hungry. They're going to be opportunistic. I definitely expect Kirby Smart to, definitely be aggressive and really want to take over this game, through the run as well. And obviously Trevor Etienne's hasn't been there as well, and you're going to have to rely on Nate Frazier a little bit more too, which I would be okay with if I'm Georgia. I definitely expect both these teams to have some issues running the ball. Obviously I think a lot of people, and including myself, definitely predict this game to be on the lower scoring end, which is not a bad thing at all because, obviously everybody knows with SEC football, games are won and lost in the trenches, and who dominates that front. But it's also going to be about who makes less mistakes. Because if Nico does play, I mean, I think we can sit here presumably and say he's probably not going to be at 100%, which I don't think he necessarily needs to be. He doesn't need to be. Obviously, you want him to be 100%, but I think Tennessee can still win this game without him being 100% because I think that's really the whole wild card to this game, because the way I see it, this is going to come down to who runs the ball, who's able to run the ball better, and who's going to give up less mistakes. It's going to be the calls that I'm going to be talking about on Saturday. Is it going to be some false start penalties? Are they going to be disciplined enough to the point where you're not going to let that Samford crowd get riled up? Georgia has done, for the most part, has been all right stopping the run lately. And if they can do exactly what they did, against Texas, for example, I could see Dylan Sampson possibly struggling this week too, because I think Georgia is going to miss Trevor Etienne, obviously, but at the same time, Georgia can find different ways to win, and maybe this week they might have to rely on the defense a little bit more, because Carson Beck, it's definitely been a falling from grace for him in that regard, because it's that's the thing that I think we're all trying to figure out is you can only pinpoint so many different issues, because as I said in my episode with Ole Miss, one of the things I pointed out is, yes, was Carson Beck at 100? Did he play as well as he could have? No, and I think everybody would concede that. However, when your wide receivers are dropping passes left and right, and your offensive line has been shaky, and I'm not a Carson Beck apologist. I don't I'm not suggesting that. All I'm insinuating or suggesting is that there are more elements in play in terms of what Georgia is struggling with, besides just, Carson Beck not not going through these progressions, not getting the decision making right, and his confidence obviously being hurt too. And even going into the year, he was supposed to be a bona fide NFL guy within the first round, and now who knows where he might end up. But in many ways, this game could be defining in some ways for Georgia in terms of where they go from here. Because for those who don't know, no, I don't care if you're in the SEC. I don't care if you're in the Big Ten. I don't care. I don't care where you're at. No three loss team deserves to be in the playoff. So if Georgia loses versus Tennessee, they are done in my book. They're done in my book. Let me put it that way. They are done in my book. But what fascinates me the most is, what if Tennessee loses this game? And let's just say they get their ass whooped, right? If they get their ass whooped and they lose by, let's just say, more than 10 points. I think that's what the spread is too, because they're still not sure about Nico. But let's just say let's say the score ends up being 27-17 or something to that effect. Where does Tennessee fall down? Are they going to be at 11, 12, or 13? Because you have to assume Texas A&M is going to beat New Mexico State, so they'll move up a couple of points. If Boise State keeps on winning, and then obviously if Georgia wins too, then you move up those teams right there. So that you can see Tennessee possibly going from being number 7 in the country to all the way down to possibly 13, 14, or 15, just on having this one loss on their resume. This other loss on their resume. Obviously, they lost to Arkansas too, who, I've said on this show, yes, they had a really horrible game versus Ole Miss and gave up almost 70 points. But at the same time, Arkansas has showed some resilience, and I definitely think they're a better team than kind of what you see on paper here and there. But to, kind of tie this all together, I mean, you have two defenses who are, super strong in their own ways, right? Like Tennessee has been pretty consistent defensively this year. They don't give up too many explosive plays. They don't allow you to run the clock on you, and they are very effective at being able to control the pace of the game. Because to me, that's also going to be, sort of the bread and butter in terms of, being able to run effectively. Because if Tennessee can run effectively, get Dylan Sampson going, and in a way where not only are you taking less pressure off of Nico, but maybe if you saw some tape and you saw some vulnerabilities with this Georgia secondary, maybe you do take some shots and try to silence this crowd. And at the same time too, that's another component of this game is Kirby Smart is an absolute genius when it comes to making adjustments, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So I just can't imagine them necessarily letting Tennessee do that as well. But at the same time too, when you put this all together, Kirby Smart has had a lot of success versus Tennessee in his tenure as head coach, and I'm definitely of the mindset that this will be a very close, a very competitive game, back and forth. But it's going to come down to who makes less mistakes and who runs the ball more. Because if Georgia can figure out those offensive line inconsistencies, they might be able to do just enough to the point to get them a win. But this is definitely a must win for both teams, especially when you're in this stretch too. Because if the Vols can get through this and they're still you know and they're still putting up points on the board, that it could be one of those teams that we're talking about when we're going into the first round of the playoff too. But at the same time, we're at the point now where somebody's going to get left out, and unfortunately in this moment, for Tennessee, if you lose to Georgia and you lose to Arkansas, that people are going to talk about that Arkansas loss, especially even more now, since since Arkansas has kind of just been a muddling 500 team now. But yes, absolutely. Look for who's going to run the ball more. Look to see how the Vols are able to kind of take advantage of maybe some longer term plays, and how to get Nico going effectively, but at the same time not so much where you're dependent on him. And I can't say I'm surprised. Maybe they let Dylan Sampson run it out wide, get vertical a little bit, maybe try to test these linebackers who have been pretty resilient all year. But of course, all eyes are going to be on Mike Bobo, and seeing how you can maximize Carson Beck. But again, to me, the most important element of this game is who runs the ball more effectively, and also most importantly, who makes less mistakes.